Have you ever felt like you're just drowning in this chaotic sea of information? I mean, we all have, right? Well, today, we're going to dig into a really powerful mental model that can help make sense of it all. It's called knowledge soup, and honestly, it might just change the way you look at data forever.
So, let's just start with a really basic question. I want you to think about all the information inside your company, or heck, even just in your own brain. Is it a perfectly organized library, with a card catalog and everything in its right place? Or is it a bit more chaotic, kind of like a simmering, messy, constantly changing soup?
And that's really the whole idea right there. The old way of thinking, the library model, is static. It's ordered. It's siloed off. But let's be real. The reality for most of us is the soup. It's dynamic, it's chaotic, and everything is blended together. The goal isn't to be afraid of this mess, but to figure out how to become a really good chef.
To do that, we're going to take a little four-part journey today. First, we'll nail down what knowledge soup actually is. Then we'll look at all the raw ingredients floating around in there. After that, we'll get into the art of cooking this soup. And finally, the most important part, we'll see how to extract all that actionable flavor, the real value.
All right, let's dive into Section 1. What in the world is knowledge soup? This is all about moving from thinking about a static library to a dynamic meal.
So here's the core of it. Knowledge soup is a way to think about information as something that's fluid, blended, and always moving. See, unlike a library, a soup has entropy. If you don't keep stirring it, the really important heavy stuff sinks to the bottom where no one can see it. And the new lighter insights, they can just evaporate right off the top.
And look, this isn't just some abstract idea. This reflects a huge strategic shift in the world of technology. For years, we built rigid, structured data warehouses. Now, everyone's talking about data lakes, which are basically giant unstructured soups. And here's why that's so profound. If you structure data too early, you can actually destroy its potential. By keeping it as a raw soup, you save the potential for future discoveries you haven't even thought of yet.
Okay, so if we're dealing with a soup, we gotta understand what's in it, right? Section 2, the soup's raw ingredients. Let's look at all the little bits, pieces, and fragments that are floating around in there.
So one of the most interesting ingredients is what we call fragments. These are just incomplete bits of information, a snippet of a Slack message, a half-finished report. And what's wild is that they're psychologically super powerful because of something called the Zeigarnik effect. It's our brain's weird tendency to remember unfinished things way better than finished ones. Our minds are basically wired to hunt for closure, which makes these little fragments totally irresistible.
Just think about this in a really high-stakes environment. An intelligence analyst's entire job is to swim through a massive soup of these fragments, intercepted signals, partial reports, and try to piece together the big picture of something like a terrorist plot. No single piece tells the whole story, but when you put them all together, they start to create a probable truth.
But of course, it's not just fragments. The soup is chock full of other raw ingredients. You've got tiny bits and pieces like little code snippets or sensor logs. You've got totally unstructured stuff like raw video and audio. Then you've got these diverse elements, like the totally incompatible worldviews of, say, lawyers and engineers. And on top of that, you've got a mix of hard data and soft qualitative information. It really is a jumble. Which naturally brings us to Section 3, the art of cooking. So how do we take this incredibly messy mix of ingredients and actually create something valuable? How do we combine everything, let it simmer and spark brand new ideas?
Well, one of the key processes is called amalgamation. A perfect example is a big corporate merger. You're literally forcing two completely separate cultures into one single pot. And what's the first result? Usually it's chaos. It's messy. But if you manage it right, what eventually emerges from that mess is a new, stronger alloy of knowledge. And you can't rush that process, which brings us to what's called the Gumbo method. You can't just microwave two cultures together and hope for the best. First, you have to combine diverse teams. Then, you give them a shared project. That's kind of like the roux, the base that holds it all together. And then, and this is the crucial part, you have to let it simmer. You have to give it time. Only then do you get that deep, organic bonding.
Now, if you take that idea and just crank it up to 11, you get to the primordial soup. This is where you intentionally engineer an environment with a super high density of 3 key things: talent, capital, and really interesting problems. The theory is, if you make the mix rich enough, new ideas will literally just assemble themselves and come to life.
And this isn't just a theory. This has been turned into a real-world business model. Venture studios, that's exactly what they do. They pack a space with talent, money, and challenges, and they trust that new, viable companies will emerge from that mix. Almost like the way life itself emerged from the primordial soup of the early Earth. It's a wild concept.
Okay, so we've got our soup, and we know how to cook it. That leads us to our final, and let's be honest, most important section: extracting actionable flavor. How do we find the actual nourishment in all of that noise?
So let's just start with the scale of this challenge. I want you to imagine a soup that contains 10 million financial transactions. And almost all of them, like 99.99%, are totally legitimate. The value, and the crime, is hidden somewhere deep inside. How on earth do you find it?
You find it by looking for what are called latent connections. Using tools like graph theory, which is basically just a way to map out and analyze relationships, you can uncover patterns that are totally invisible if you just look at one thing at a time. Instead of looking at a single transaction, you suddenly see the whole network. And boom, this subtle, circular pattern of money transfers between shell companies pops out, basically screaming fraud.
And this same idea applies absolutely everywhere. Let's say you have thousands of customer support tickets. Using a technique called topic modeling, which is just a fancy way of saying it automatically finds recurring themes, you stop seeing individual problems. Instead, you discover a latent theme, like UI confusion, and that lets you stop playing whack-a-mole with tickets and instead go fix the root cause in the product itself. Now that is extracting real value.
But here's the trap that so many organizations fall into. They suffer from data hoarding. They spend an absolute fortune storing a massive soup of data, but they massively underinvest in the tools and the time that it takes to actually extract anything from it. And the result? They have this theoretically valuable asset that in reality is just a useless cost center. So the real question you got to ask is, are you investing as much in the ladle as you are in the pot?
Okay, now for the grand finale. Let's zoom all the way out. I mean, to the grandest scale imaginable. The Noosphere. You can think of this as the knowledge soup for our entire planet. A kind of global cognitive layer where ideas and sentiments and thoughts all mix together, making thought itself almost like a public utility.
So what does that mean in practice? It means that by monitoring the subtle changes in this global soup of ideas, through things like social sentiment analysis, strategists can get a real-time weather report of human intent. They can potentially predict everything from stock market crashes to political revolutions. It's pretty mind-bending.
And that brings us to the end of our little culinary journey. We've defined the soup, we've looked at the ingredients, we've learned how to cook it, and we've seen how to extract its flavor. Which leaves us with just one final question for you. What valuable, hidden connections are simmering away right now in your knowledge soup? Thanks for joining us.